He said, "This is just routine." But when they dragged her against the pillar, nothing was routine anymore. In less than 5 minutes, a boy's shaky phone, a blind dog's bark, and a general's calm voice would change everything. Rebecca Hayes had just stepped out of NATO headquarters in Chicago, rain sliding down her leather jacket as she reached for her car keys. She thought the storm was over. She was wrong. The real storm waited in the shadows of the garage. The rain had slowed to a mist, leaving the streets of Chicago slick with reflection. Towering glass buildings loomed over the city, their lights blurred by the thin veil of drizzle still clinging to the night. The NATO annex stood like a fortress of stone and steel, its windows faintly glowing against the gloom. Beneath it, down in the concrete labyrinth of the underground parking structure, the air was colder, damp with the scent of oil and rainwater dripping from the ceiling. It was here, in the shadowed belly of the city, that General Rebecca Hayes made her way back to her car. Rebecca Hayes was a woman whose presence carried its own kind of gravity. 52 years old, she bore the marks of a lifetime spent under both the sun of foreign deserts and the harsh fluorescence of war rooms. Her hair, streaked with silver and pulled loosely back, gave her a look both distinguished and untamed. Her eyes, a sharp gray blue, had the practiced calm of someone who had stared down crises far greater than most could imagine. Though dressed simply that night, dark jeans, a fitted t-shirt, and a weathered brown leather jacket, there was no mistaking her bearing. She moved with the quiet certainty of command, every step measured, every glance purposeful. Years of military discipline had etched themselves into the lines of her face, and yet there was a warmth beneath, the kind that surfaced only when she spoke to those she trusted. But tonight her face was still, focused, her mind lingering on the classified briefing she had just delivered. At her side padded Justice, her German shepherd. Justice was no ordinary dog, 7 years old, strong in build though his sight had been taken by disease 2 years earlier. A silk-white cloth covered his clouded eyes, tied gently behind his ears. Despite his blindness, Justice navigated the world with uncanny precision, guided by sound, scent, and the steady rhythm of Rebecca's steps. His fur, once a sharp mix of black and tan, had dulled slightly with age, but his presence was striking nonetheless. The scarf made him a haunting figure, almost ghostly in the dim garage light, but Rebecca trusted him with her life. His loyalty was absolute, his instincts sharp, and though the world was dark to him, he saw more with his heart than many men with perfect vision. Rebecca's boots clicked softly against the wet concrete as she approached her black SUV. She reached into her pocket for the keys, her mind replaying the last words of the meeting. Threats, cyber operations, foreign actors, all heavy thoughts that weighed on her shoulders like stone. She exhaled, preparing for the solitude of the drive home. Then, suddenly, footsteps echoed behind her. Fast, heavy, urgent. "Hands where I can see them!" A voice barked, sharp and commanding. Rebecca froze, her body instinctively straightening. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as 2 uniformed officers emerged from the shadows, guns raised, flashlight beams, cutting into her face. The first, Sergeant Bradley Cooper, was a man built like a wall, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his dark blue uniform. He was in his late 40s, with a square jaw perpetually clenched, as though the world were an adversary waiting to be beaten. His hair, cropped close, was graying at the temples, but his face was red with the flush of authority. Bradley had spent 15 years on the force, and the job had hardened him into a man who trusted his gut more than procedure. He didn't like being questioned, didn't like being challenged. His arrogance showed in every move. He was the kind of officer who believed respect was demanded, not earned. The second, Officer Ethan Miller, was far younger. Barely 25, he had the lanky frame of someone who hadn't yet grown comfortable in his own body. His jawline was sharp but tense, his lips pressed thin in concentration. There was a nervous twitch in his cheek as he tried to mirror Bradley's confidence but lacked the same certainty. Ethan was new to the force, eager to prove himself, but beneath the surface he was unsure, always second-guessing. His training was still fresh, his instincts not yet tempered. Tonight he followed Bradley's lead without question, though his hand shook slightly on the grip of his weapon. Rebecca raised her hand slowly, her voice calm and measured. "Officers, I am General Rebecca Hayes of the United States Army. I just left a NATO briefing. This is my vehicle. Step away from the car," Ethan shouted, his voice higher than he meant it to be, betraying his nerves. Bradley didn't wait. He closed the distance quickly, grabbing Rebecca's wrist with a force that twisted her arm behind her back. Her keys clattered to the ground. Justice barked loudly, lunging forward, but the leash snapped taut, the dog's claws scraping against the concrete as he fought to stay near her. "Quiet that mutt," Bradley growled, kicking Rebecca's laptop bag out of the way. His grip on her wrist was iron. "We got a call about someone tampering with cars." "You match the description." Rebecca winced at the pressure but didn't resist. Her voice remained steady, every word deliberate. "Sergeant, I've identified myself. My ID is in my pocket. If you'll just save it," Bradley cut her off, tightening the cuff around her wrist with a metallic click. "You're not talking your way out of this." Justice let out a sharp, anguished bark, the sound echoing through the garage. He pressed against Rebecca's legs, sensing her distress, but the leash kept him from shielding her fully. Rebecca turned her face to the cold concrete pillar, her breath slow, her body rigid but composed. And somewhere in the shadows, another set of eyes watched. Luke Turner was 13, a boy with a mop of sandy brown hair and a freckled face that still carried the softness of childhood. He wore an oversized hoodie and sneakers that squeaked when wet. Luke was curious to a fault, the kind of kid who often wandered where he wasn't supposed to. That night, he was on his way home from the convenience store, a bag of candy stuffed in his pocket, when he noticed the flashlights in the garage. Something about it pulled him in. Maybe the sharp tone of the voices, maybe the uneasy bark of the dog. He crept closer, his phone already in his hand. Luke wasn't brave, not really, but he was observant. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where you learned quickly that sometimes adults got things wrong. Terribly wrong. His father had been stopped once, mistaken for someone else, and Luke had seen the anger, the humiliation, and the silence that followed. That memory burned in him, shaping a cautious but determined streak. So when he raised his phone and pressed record, his hands trembled, but he didn't stop. Through the shaky lens, the boy captured the sight of Rebecca Hayes, her tall figure pinned against a concrete pillar, her silver hair falling loose from its tie, her leather jacket pressed rough against the stone. The cuffs gleamed under the harsh light, cutting into her wrists. Justice barked and twisted, the white blindfold stark against his dark fur. Luke swallowed hard, his throat dry. He whispered to himself, "This isn't right." His heart pounded in his chest as he zoomed in, trying to steady the frame. The voices of the officers echoed harshly in the cavernous space, but he dared not move closer. All he could do was watch and record. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, the sound of the cuffs rattling, filling her ears. She didn't yell, she didn't fight, she simply stood tall, even pressed against stone, her dignity intact. And in that silence, the night grew heavier. the rain outside muffled by the weight of concrete and consequence. Rebecca Hayes stood pressed against the cold concrete pillar, the cuffs biting into her wrists. Her breath was steady, her shoulders square, as if she were in formation rather than under suspicion. She had survived harsher interrogations in foreign lands and more dangerous ambushes in combat zones. This, she told herself, would be handled with the same composure. With a subtle movement of her fingers, she twisted her wrist just enough to brush the side of her smartwatch. A soft vibration pulsed against her skin. The silent SOS signal had been sent. It carried her identity, her location, and her distress straight to the Pentagon's communication wing. She said nothing of the action, but deep inside she felt the weight of inevitability. Bradley Cooper smirked, the kind of crooked grin worn by men who believed they had the upper hand. "What's that, huh? Playing with your fancy gadgets." His voice dripped with contempt, as though Rebecca's calm was an insult to his authority. He leaned closer, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Lady, you're wasting your time. Nobody's coming for you. Not for you." He emphasized the last words, revealing more than he intended. Rebecca's eyes remained fixed ahead, her tone even, unshaken. "You have less than 10 minutes before this garage is full of people with more authority than you will ever meet in your career. Choose wisely what you do in those 10 minutes. Ethan Miller shifted uncomfortably beside his partner, the beam of his flashlight wavering. The young officer's nerves were fraying. He was new, still wearing the invisible weight of proving himself. But something about the woman's words pierced through his doubt. Her voice carried no panic, no desperation. It was the voice of someone who spoke the truth because she had nothing to fear. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. He glanced at Bradley, then back at Rebecca. For a fleeting moment he considered asking for her ID, just to be sure. But Bradley's posture, unyielding, proud, kept him silent. Justice, the blind German shepherd, growled low at Bradley's proximity, his hackles bristling, the white cloth over his eyes glowing ghost-like in the fluorescent light. He tugged at his leash, his body leaning toward Rebecca protectively. Though sightless, the dog's instincts were sharp, his every muscle tense with the knowledge that his master was in danger. Across the garage, hidden in the shadows behind a row of parked sedans, Luke Turner crouched low. The boy's small frame trembled as much from fear as from the chill of the damp air. His sandy brown hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat despite the drizzle outside. He held his phone tightly, the red recording dot blinking on the screen. He had been filming since the first command rang out, but now his fear wrestled with his conscience. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain it would give him away. Luke's finger hovered over the stop button, then pulled. Back. No, he couldn't stop now. Not when everything about the scene screamed wrong. Rebecca wasn't resisting. She was calm, composed, professional. And yet the cuffs locked around her wrists, the guns stayed trained, and the taller officer mocked her every word. Uncertain what to do, Luke tapped another option on his phone. Go live. The screen shifted, and suddenly his friends could see everything. His small circle of classmates, kids who usually teased him for being nosy, now had a front-row view of a woman pressed against a pillar, a dog barking in protest, and two officers towering over her. Messages began to pop up on his screen, scrolling fast. "Dude, what are you doing? Are those real cops? Holy crap, she's wearing a badge." And then one that made his stomach drop. "Luke, that's not just some lady. Look at her jacket. She's got a military patch. She's someone important." Luke zoomed in, his hand shaking. There it was. The glint of the Army insignia sewn inside her jacket, half visible where the leather had shifted. His pulse quickened. He suddenly understood that this wasn't just a random arrest. This was bigger. Much bigger. Back in the circle of harsh light, Bradley laughed, shaking his head as if to brush away Rebecca's warning. 10 minutes, huh? You really think you scare me with that? He pressed harder on her shoulder, forcing her face closer to the pillar. You people always think you can pull rank and make us back down. Not tonight. Rebecca inhaled, steady as a mountain. Her voice was low but clear. This isn't about rank. It's about accountability, and when the clock runs out, you'll wish you'd listened. Ethan's grip on his flashlight loosened slightly. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, chewing on the inside of his cheek. He didn't like this. The woman wasn't resisting, wasn't even raising her voice. He glanced down at Justice, who let out a sharp, anguished bark, almost human in its urgency. Ethan's gut twisted. He had joined the force believing in protection, in service. But what he saw here looked like neither. In the shadows, Luke's livestream reached more viewers. His friends began sharing the feed, snippets of comments flashing across the screen. She's too calm, something's up. That guy's out of control. Luke, don't get caught. Luke bit his lip, lowering the volume, but he kept recording. He knew deep down that if he stopped, no one would believe what he had seen. The garage hummed with tension. The drip of rainwater from the ceiling echoed like a metronome, counting down the seconds. Rebecca stood unyielding. Bradley radiated arrogance. Ethan wrestled with conscience, and Luke hid in the shadows, a silent witness broadcasting the truth. Rebecca tilted her head slightly, her gray-blue eyes locking briefly on Ethan. Officer, she said evenly, do you want to be remembered as the man who ignored a federal ID, or the one who had the courage to stop a mistake before it went too far? Ethan flinched at the question, caught between duty to his partner and duty to his oath. His mouth opened, but no words came, and then Bradley barked, "Ignore her! She's bluffing." He pulled Rebecca's other wrist into the cuffs with a snap of finality. Justice lunged forward with all his strength, the leash straining, his teeth bared in a guttural growl. Rebecca didn't resist. She didn't cry out. She only turned her head slightly, her voice calm, almost chilling in its certainty. 9 minutes left. Luke nearly dropped his phone at those words. The boy realized she wasn't bluffing. She had already called for help. Something was coming, and he was recording history unfold. The rain outside thickened, pattering against the grated entrance of the garage. The sound mixed with the dog's barking, the officer's sharp commands, and the steady silence of a general who had seen enough to know exactly how this night would end. The parking garage seemed to grow colder, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the steady patter of rain outside. The silence between commands was heavy, charged with the tension of decisions that could not be undone. Rebecca Hayes stood still, her wrists bound behind her, the metal cuffs pressing into her skin. Her gaze remained steady, her presence calm. Years of battle had taught her that sometimes survival was not in the fight, but in the refusal to surrender dignity. Bradley Cooper, with his jaw tight and temper flaring, crouched down and yanked open Rebecca's brown leather bag. His large hands rummaged roughly until they closed around a sleek, black military-issued laptop. The device bore a small steel plate etched with serial numbers and a Pentagon tracking barcode, but Bradley ignored it. He hoisted it up, smirking like a hunter displaying his kill. Well, what do we have here? Some kind of stolen hardware? This'll look good on the report. Rebecca's gray-blue eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the damp air. That laptop is classified property of the Department of Defense. Mishandling it is a federal crime. Check the barcode inside the flap and you'll know exactly who I am. But Bradley wasn't listening. He turned the laptop over in his hands, acting as though he'd discovered contraband. He wasn't looking for truth, he was looking for control. His pride demanded that she remain the suspect, no matter what proof she offered. Justice, the blind German shepherd, growled deep in his throat. His ears pricked, his nose twitching as he sensed his master's rising distress. He moved forward, the white cloth covering his eyes shifting slightly as he pressed his body between Rebecca and Bradley. His fur bristled, a protective wall of muscle and sound. His growl rose into a sharp bark that echoed through the cavernous space. Ethan Miller, the young officer, startled at the noise. He stepped forward quickly, gripping the leash with uncertain hands. Ethan's tall, thin frame looked awkward as he tried to restrain the powerful dog. His face was pale, sweat beading at his hairline, and his flashlight trembled in his grip. Justice's strength pulled him off balance, his boots scraping against the wet floor. Ethan's nerves showed in every twitch of his jaw, his confidence unraveling as his conscience gnawed at him. He could feel it now, that Rebecca was telling the truth, that Bradley's stubbornness was digging them deeper. Rebecca didn't resist the cuffs, but her voice carried authority sharper than any weapon. "Sergeant, every second you mishandle that laptop, you add to the list of charges against you. Protocol exists for a reason. You are crossing a line." Bradley shot her a glare, his pride unwilling to yield. "Protocol? You think you can lecture me about protocol?" He shook the laptop in his grip, mocking. "People like you always think you're untouchable." Rebecca turned her head, her calm unwavering. "No, Sergeant. People like me know the cost of failing to follow rules, and tonight, that cost will be yours." Justice barked again, straining against Ethan's grip. Ethan's hands shook harder, his breathing uneven. He glanced at Bradley, then back at Rebecca. His eyes flickered with something: doubt, guilt, fear. For the first time, Ethan wondered if this was the moment that would define him, the moment he would look back on and wish he had spoken. Hidden in the shadows beyond the row of parked cars, Luke Turner clutched his phone tighter. The boy's knees pressed into the damp concrete as he adjusted his angle, his camera zooming closer to capture the laptop now in Bradley's hands. His heart raced, the lens shaking with his nerves. He wanted to stay silent, invisible, but the damp air tickled his nose. Suddenly, a small sneeze escaped him. Sharp, unplanned, betraying his presence. Luke froze, his entire body stiff. For a moment, terror washed over him. His wide, freckled face went pale, his sandy hair plastered to his forehead. He held his breath, waiting for the officers to notice. But outside, the rain had thickened, its drumming against the grated entrance masking the sound. Bradley was too busy gloating, Ethan too consumed by doubt, Rebecca too focused on her composure. None of them turned toward the noise. Luke exhaled quietly, his chest tight with relief. He raised the phone again, zooming in until the screen showed the serial plate gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His whisper was barely audible, but the phone's mic caught it as he murmured to his small live-stream audience. "If she's really a general, that cop just destroyed his career." The comments on his live feed popped up rapidly. "Holy crap, Luke, get out of there." "No way this is real." "She's telling the truth, man. I Googled the insignia. She's military for sure." Luke swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wanted to run, but something in him wouldn't let him. Maybe it was the memory of his father being wrongly stopped years ago, or maybe it was the sight of justice, blind yet defiant, standing firm for his master. Whatever it was, Luke knew he couldn't look away. He had to keep recording. Rebecca shifted her stance slightly, even bound. her voice calm and precise. "Sergeant, I've given you every chance to correct this mistake. When others arrive, the record will show exactly what happened, and I promise you, the record will not be kind." Bradley scoffed, but for the first time his movements slowed. His arrogance wavered just slightly under the weight of her certainty. He glanced at Ethan, perhaps expecting reassurance. But Ethan's eyes were fixed on the laptop, his knuckles white on Justice's leash, his breath shallow. The young officer looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering whether to step back or fall. The garage was a stage of contrasts. Bradley's stubborn pride, Ethan's unraveling nerves, Rebecca's unwavering resolve, Justice's blind loyalty, and Luke's secret witness behind the camera. The rain outside beat harder, as though the storm itself was counting down the minutes left before the inevitable reckoning. Rebecca lifted her chin slightly, her gray-blue eyes gleaming with defiance. 8 minutes left. The echo of footsteps thundered through the concrete chamber, sharp and synchronized. A cadence that carried authority far greater than the shouts that had filled the air minutes before. It was not the hurried scuffle of ordinary officers. It was the precise rhythm of men trained to move as one. The sound alone was enough to shift the balance of power in the garage. Bradley Cooper froze, the laptop heavy in his hand, while Ethan Miller's breath caught in his throat. Rebecca Hayes, still in cuffs, but standing with unbroken dignity, tilted her head ever so slightly. She had heard those steps before, in countless halls of command. Reinforcements had arrived. From the shadows emerged 3 figures in tailored suits, followed by 2 military police officers in crisp uniforms. Their presence cut through the dim garage like a blade. The suits moved with the calm authority of men who knew every second mattered. Leading them was Special Agent Colin Redd of the Department of Defense. He was in his early 40s, with short dark hair combed neatly, sharp brown eyes behind rimless glasses, and a build that suggested years of both fieldwork and gym discipline. His reputation preceded him. Redd was known not for his temper, but for his precision, a man who believed facts were sharper than fury. He carried himself with the quiet weight of someone who had spent his life in the pursuit of order, shaped partly by his childhood in a lawless border town where silence often meant survival. The military police flanked the group. One was Corporal Janet McGraw, a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her early 30s with auburn hair tucked tightly under her cap. She had a reputation for her no-nonsense demeanor and an unflinching commitment to fairness, molded by years of growing up as the only girl in a family of 5 brothers. Beside her marched Private David Schultz, barely 22, clean-cut with sharp blue eyes, his uniform so pristine it seemed untouched by time. He was young, earnest, and eager, still carrying the optimism of someone who believed deeply in the honor of service. Agent Redd's voice rang out, firm and clipped. "Step away from the detainee immediately." Ethan released the leash in a rush, the strap slipping from his trembling fingers. Justice bolted forward, pressing against Rebecca's legs, his body trembling but his spirit fierce. His blind eyes, hidden behind the white cloth, turned toward the sound of his master, and his low whine softened into a nudge as though to say, "I stayed. I protected." Bradley's jaw tightened, the color draining from his face. His hand, still clutching the laptop, trembled. He tried to summon his usual arrogance, but the presence of federal agents had stripped it away. His voice cracked as he began, "We had a call about—" "Silence," Agent Redd cut him off without raising his tone. He stepped forward, the soles of his polished shoes striking the wet floor with deliberate finality. "You detained a federal officer without verification. You ignored identification. You escalated without probable cause. Did she resist? His sharp gaze shifted to Ethan. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. No, sir. She complied the whole time. Agent Red's eyes narrowed further. Did she identify herself? Ethan's voice faltered. Yes, sir. She said she was a general. Rebecca's cuffs clicked open as Corporal McGraw moved swiftly behind her, her large hands precise and professional. Rebecca rotated her wrists slowly, flexing her fingers as red marks bloomed across her skin. She did not flinch, did not wince. She stood tall, her silver hair catching the glow of the lights, her posture that of a soldier who had never once bent to injustice. Her eyes met Bradley's, unwavering. Her voice was calm, almost soft, yet it carried more weight than any shout. You're right, Sergeant. This is a joke. But the punchline. She paused, letting the silence wrap around her words. Is your career. Bradley's lips parted, but no sound came out. His face flushed red, his pride finally crumbling under the truth. Behind a silver sedan, Luke Turner's heart pounded against his ribcage. He had been crouched so long his legs were numb, but now the moment pulled him forward. He hesitated only a second before stepping out from the shadows. The boy's hoodie was soaked at the edges, his sneakers squeaking against the damp floor. His sandy hair clung to his forehead, his freckled cheeks flushed with fear and determination. His phone trembled in his hand as he approached the agents. Sir, Luke stammered, his voice cracking with nerves. I recorded everything. From the start, it's all here. He extended the phone with both hands, as though offering something sacred. One of the suited agents, a man in his late 30s named Martin Cole, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and sharp-eyed, took the phone carefully. Cole was known for his quiet loyalty, the type of man who spoke little but observed everything. He glanced at the screen, his stern features softening for a fleeting moment. He looked at Luke and gave a single, measured nod. We have everything we need. Luke's chest rose and fell rapidly, relief flooding him. His gaze shifted to Rebecca, who now stood free beside Justice. She turned her head, her gray-blue eyes finding his. For a moment, she allowed the faintest flicker of warmth to cross her face. Justice's nose twitched. He padded forward, drawn to the boy's scent. His blind eyes could not see Luke, but his instincts led him true. The dog pressed his head gently against the boy's trembling hand. Luke gasped softly, then let his fingers rest in the thick fur, the warmth of the animal grounding him. His fear ebbed, replaced by the quiet certainty that he had done the right thing. Rebecca's gaze lingered on the boy, her expression unreadable but full of unspoken acknowledgement. She didn't thank him aloud. No words were needed. The truth had spoken, louder than anything she or anyone else could have said. The garage seemed to exhale, the storm outside pounding heavier, but inside the balance had shifted. Power was no longer in the hands of arrogance, but in the calm force of accountability. And in that moment, the silence was louder than the rain. The storm had broken by morning, leaving Chicago washed clean beneath a pale blue sky. The city moved on with its usual noise, taxis honking, commuters rushing, children laughing on sidewalks. But in one corner of the nation, silence gave way to a ripple that was spreading far beyond the parking garage. The story had begun to leak, first in whispers, then in local broadcasts, then in national headlines. Bradley Cooper's name appeared in bold letters across newspapers and glowing screens. His face, once hardened with authority, now looked weary and defiant in the photos that accompanied the reports. After 15 years on the force, his career ended in a press release from Arlington's police chief. Effective immediately, Sergeant Bradley Cooper has been terminated following gross misconduct and violation of protocol. The words were clinical, stripped of drama, but the weight of them closed the door on the man who had thought himself untouchable. Ethan Miller's story unfolded differently. The young officer could not meet the eyes of his colleagues in the days that followed. His lanky frame seemed smaller each time he walked into the precinct, his uniform hanging looser, his shoulders curved inward as though carrying a burden no one else could see. The resignation letter he submitted was handwritten, each word pressed deeply into the paper. I failed to speak when silence was complicity. I no longer have the right to wear this badge. A copy of the letter made its way into Rebecca Hayes's hands. Tucked into the envelope was a separate note, private and raw. General Hayes, I am sorry. I saw the truth, but lacked the courage to act. I hope one day my silence won't define me. Rebecca read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it into a drawer alongside other relics of her long career, medals, campaign pins, and photographs of comrades lost. She did not smile, but neither did she discard it. To her, it was not an excuse, but a reminder of the fragile line between choice and consequence. Despite the growing media frenzy, Rebecca did not hold a press conference. She ignored the requests for interviews, the flashing cameras that waited outside her townhouse, and the questions shouted by reporters eager for a sound bite. Instead, she stood at the front of a classroom filled with young officer candidates at Fort Sheridan, a training post north of the city. The lecture hall smelled faintly of chalk and old wood, its walls lined with portraits of generals long past. The cadets sat upright in their seats, eyes locked on the woman who carried herself with the weight of lived experience. Rebecca's hair was tied back, her brown leather jacket replaced by her crisp uniform. Justice lay quietly at her side, the white cloth over his eyes resting gently as his ears twitched at every sound. Rebecca began not with anger, but with truth. Her voice filled the room, steady, unwavering. Rank can carry weight. Medals can shine. Uniforms can command attention. But remember this, your skin, your gender, your face. They enter the room before you ever speak. You will be judged before you open your mouth. That is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to decide how you respond. The cadets listened, not with polite nods, but with rapt attention, their pens moving only occasionally. For many of them, her words were not new. They had felt the stares, the doubts, the unspoken rules of who belonged and who did not. But hearing it from a general who bore the marks of cuffs on her wrists transformed theory into reality. Meanwhile, Luke Turner's life had shifted overnight. The video he recorded became central evidence in the investigation, its clarity undeniable, its context irrefutable. The shaky lens of a 13-year-old boy captured what seasoned professionals had ignored, calm compliance against baseless force. His live stream, once a nervous decision, became the spark that ensured the truth could not be buried. The Department of Defense invited Luke to the local garrison. He arrived with his mother, a woman in her late 30s named Dana Turner. Dana was tall, slender, with soft brown hair pulled into a messy bun and tired eyes that told of years balancing 2 jobs and single parenthood. She was protective of her son, wary of the sudden attention, but when she watched him step into the crisp order of the military base, her heart swelled with pride. Luke, usually shy and awkward, walked straighter that day. At the ceremony, Rebecca stood at attention, her silver hair gleaming beneath the bright sunlight. She wore her full dress uniform, the ribbons and insignias across her chest glowing with history. Beside her sat Justice, the white cloth over his eyes fluttering in the breeze, his body still and regal, as though he, too, understood the gravity of the moment. An officer stepped forward with a small velvet box, inside of which lay a commemorative coin, an emblem of gratitude. Luke's hands shook as the box was pressed into them, his freckled face flushing with embarrassment and pride. He glanced up at Rebecca, uncertain of what to do, until she leaned down slightly, her gray-blue eyes steady on his. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Her words were few, but they landed heavier than any speech. Luke nodded, clutching the coin as though it were a shield. Justice rose, his nose twitching, and stepped toward the boy. He nudged Luke's leg gently, the white cloth shifting with the motion. Luke reached down, his fingers threading through the thick fur. In that touch, the boy felt a bond that needed no words, the loyalty of a dog who had stood against fear, and the gratitude of a soldier who had endured without breaking. The ceremony ended without pomp, without cameras or reporters. There were no grand declarations, only the quiet raising of the American flag, its fabric snapping in the fresh wind. Rebecca, Luke, and Justice stood together, beneath it, their shadows long against the ground. The morning sun bathed them in gold, the air clear after the storm. Rebecca did not smile, but her chin lifted, her stance resolute. Luke's shoulders, once hunched, stood tall beside her. Justice sat between them, still and silent, the white cloth across his blind eyes fluttering like a banner of its own. In that moment they were bound not by title or age, but by truth, courage, and the weight of a single night that changed them all. The world outside could debate, speculate, and argue. But here, under the flag, in the light after the rain, justice had already been seen. In the end, this story is not only about justice, but about the quiet miracle of courage. Sometimes God places ordinary people in extraordinary moments to reveal His truth. A blind dog who stood guard without fear, a boy with a trembling phone who chose to tell the truth, and a woman who refused to surrender her dignity, all became instruments of something greater. In our daily lives, we too face moments of silence and choice. We may not stand in a parking garage or wear a uniform, but we are all called to stand for truth, even when the world looks the other way. And in those moments, God's hand moves quietly, reminding us that His justice and His mercy never fail. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below and write Amen if you believe that God still raises voices of truth in the darkest hours. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so together we can keep spreading stories of courage, faith, and light. May God bless you and your family always.